Shalom, welcome back. Here we have yet another follow-up that I want to make about a previous video. This one's really kind of in response to the one I made about Yeshua's second coming. And that video, of course, was a follow-up to the one that I made about what if everything you understood about God's plan is wrong. So, like, each one of these videos has brought up some questions or some statements, and I want to clarify. So previously, I clarified some of my position on the eschatology in the book of Revelation. That, and in the process of that, I told you that I was of the understanding that Yeshua had already returned, that he came back. His second coming was during the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, I don't know what day it was. I don't know if it was in like 67 AD or 70 AD or 69 or whatever, but it was during the Jewish War, the war that ended up with Jerusalem being destroyed in 70 AD. He was seen. Every eye in the land saw him, and it's recorded by a couple of historians. And once again, I started out that video with these two verses. Our fathers have inherited nothing but lies, and that Satan is a deceiver of the whole world, not just a select group. He's not the deceiver of just the Jews or just the Catholics or just whoever. It's he's deceived us all. And if we don't start with this mindset that, hey, maybe we got something wrong, then you end up locking yourself into some type of theology that may or may not be wrong, right. So if you approach the scripture without these preconceived notions, then maybe you might see things that you wouldn't otherwise see. And the funny thing is, I have a lot of people who believe this whole like mainstream narrative. And the mainstream narrative, it makes Jesus into a false prophet. And I'll explain that toward the end of the video. But sometimes one of them will tell me, like, oh, you need to have an open mind. You're coming at the scriptures with this understanding or that understanding, or you think Paul's false and you're just looking for stuff to prove he's false. No, I originally believed the way you did. I was raised in the Catholic Church. We have no problem with Paul in Catholicism. I came out of that into Protestantism, and again, they have no problem with Paul either. And then eventually I was in the Hebraic Roots movement, and of course they defend Paul vigorously. And so, no, I did not, it's not that I started viewing the scriptures trying to find things to deny this supposed apostleship of Paul. It's just the contradictions jumped out at me. And it took someone who, by the way, the person who really converted me to being against Paul was someone who is pro-Paul. In fact, he repeatedly says that he's pro. Like, he knows all the reasons to reject Paul, but he still chooses to not reject him. And I honestly believe that the reason for that has more to do with him thinking that he will lose financial backing from his followers than it has anything to do with him actually believing that Paul's legitimate. But that's a whole other story. So, the point is, starting off this video, we need to understand this. We need to understand that this is everybody, and this could include us. I can admit, I have no problem admitting it was me. It probably still is me. There's probably some stuff I still don't have right. But I do believe I'm getting closer to the truth. And I believe that that's the path I've been on, is moving closer to truth. And that's caused me to have to leave some of this other stuff behind. So, something I want to touch on first. Let's get our definitions and understanding correct. What is an apocalypse? And most people, if you say, what is an apocalypse, they will give you definition number 4 on this dictionary definition. A great catastrophe that results in widespread destruction, and the collapse of civilization. Okay, but that's not what the word apocalypse means. It's a Greek word, and it means revealing. That's why you have the book of Revelation. It is to reveal something. It is not to hide something. It's not to mislead you. It is a book that reveals prophetic truth, like definition number 5, a prophetic disclosure, a revelation. But the definition I want to really kind of focus in on is number 2, and we'll get into some more clarification on it. But it's any number of anonymous Jewish or Christian texts from around the 2nd century BC to the 2nd century AD containing prophetic or symbolic visions, especially of the imminent destruction of the world and salvation of the righteous. So there are some issues I have with this definition, but I think it's getting a little closer to what it is. An apocalypse is essentially, there's always a spirit guide. There's always like an angel or someone leading the person who is writing the apocalypse. Now, in here, in several places, it says that the apocalypses are usually written with pseudonyms. They're usually anonymous. And the big reason they say that is because the book of Daniel is a type of apocalypse. And they don't want to admit that Daniel wrote it, because if Daniel wrote it during his lifetime, it very accurately and definitively confirms that the Maccabean revolt and the Greek occupation and all that stuff was prophesied by Daniel through that revelation, through that apocalypse. And in the book of Revelation, John even refers back to the apocalypse of Daniel. And so even if somebody were to make the case that the book of Daniel was not written by Daniel himself, so therefore, see, what they want to do is they want to try to make it to where the book of Daniel was written after the events happened that Daniel prophesies. But the thing is, Daniel also prophesies about the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And we know for a fact that the book of Daniel existed at least as early as the 200s BC. So they still run into an issue there. But the thing is, most people don't study the Jewish revolt. They don't study the way the book of Revelation is fulfilled. And so that's one of those things that we miss out on, and we don't realize that it actually confirms the book of Daniel as being prophetic in a major way. So essentially that's what an apocalypse is. And so we'll go to Wikipedia too. This is from Wikipedia. I know a lot of people have problems with it, but honestly, I think it's a pretty good explanation of what an apocalypse is. And so this is not the entire article. I'm just going to give you some key paragraphs that I thought kind of make the case of what an apocalypse is. So it's from the ancient Greek word apocalypsis, which means revelation or disclosure. It does not mean destruction. It means you are revealing something. It's a literary genre in which a supernatural being reveals cosmic mysteries. So it's a literary genre. It is not a prophecy specifically. It is usually revealing the proper interpretation of the prophecy. So like the prophet makes a prophecy, and then hundreds of years later the prophecy is coming true, and a apocalypse is usually written in a way as to which it is written during the time of the fulfillment of the prophecy. And so the author of the apocalypse is trying to tell you, this is how this prophecy from Isaiah is fulfilled. This is how this prophecy from Ezekiel is being fulfilled in my day. And that's what John does in the book of Revelation. He is constantly referring back to other earlier prophecies, like in the book of Joel is one that he refers to quite often. And he's referring you to the prophecy, and then he tells you in prophetic language how this prophecy is coming true. So if you don't understand the prophetic language, which we will get to in a minute, you're not going to understand what the revelation is about, because John doesn't want just anyone to understand what the apocalypse is. He only wants, the early Christian church to know, and possibly some of the Jewish people too. But by using the prophetic language, which we should be familiar with if we study prophecy, then the only people that can really understand it are the intended audience. So you have like a pagan, or some Greek or Roman reading the apocalypse. They don't understand it because they don't understand the prophetic language from the Hebrew scriptures. So an apocalypse is a literary genre in which a supernatural being reveals cosmic mysteries or the future to a human intermediary. So in both the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation, this supernatural being is an angel who leads both Daniel and John around and says, look at this, look at this. And then the supernatural being may give him some information about what it means, but there's always a supernatural being. The means of mediation include dreams, visions, heavenly journeys, and they typically feature symbolic imagery. The symbolic imagery is the prophetic language, drawn from the Hebrew Bible, cosmological, and a pessimistic historical surveys. The division of time into periods, esoteric numerology, claims of ecstasy and inspiration, almost all are written under pseudonyms, false names, claiming as author a venerated hero from a previous century, as with the book of Daniel. And that's what I was saying. They don't want Daniel to be actually written by Daniel, because it's way too accurate in the way it's fulfilled. Composed during the 2nd century BC, but bearing the name of the legendary Daniel. And then here's a paragraph from this article on the apocalypse, but it defines what eschatology is. So eschatology, from a Greek eschatos, last, concerns expectations of the end of the present age. And apocalyptic eschatology, which apocalyptic eschatology basically means a revealing of the end times. It is the application of the apocalyptic worldview to the end of the world, when God will bring judgment on the world and save his followers. An apocalypse will also often contain much eschatological material, but it need not. The baptism of Jesus in Matthew's Gospel, for example, can be considered apocalyptic, in that the heavens open for the presence of a divine mediator, the dove representing the Spirit of God, and a voice communicates supernatural information, but there is no eschatological element. So I want to pause here for a minute, since they do mention the voice from heaven at Jesus' baptism. And this has to do with the issue I have with what I'm going to talk about at the end of the video. The fact that the church, through their belief system, through the dogmas that they impose upon the people, they turn Jesus into a false prophet. Because if the church comes up with a doctrine, and the doctrine doesn't match a prophecy, the way it was fulfilled, or something of that, they don't change the doctrine to fit reality. They will go so far as changing the scripture to protect their doctrine, as in the case of this voice from heaven. So this voice from heaven in the Gospel of Matthew and Luke says, in our current copy, it says, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." What the voice originally said from heaven was, "You are my beloved Son, this day I have begotten you." And it was changed. Somebody went in and changed the text from "this day I have begotten you" to "this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Because the church had come up with an Apostles' Creed that said that Yeshua was eternally begotten of the Father. And then somebody pointed out, well, he can't be eternally begotten of the Father if he was if the voice from heaven says, "This day I have begotten you." So instead of changing their doctrine to fit the literal voice that came from heaven, I mean, the voice of God itself, they changed the words of God itself. And this is another example of why you can't say that the Bible is the unmitigated, unadulterated Word of God, because they will literally change the very Word of God from heaven to fit their doctrine. So, that's an example of an apocalypse, because there's a voice from heaven. Also, Peter's vision of the sheet with all the animals that comes down, that's an apocalyptic vision. It was revealing, the thing it was revealing, Peter actually interprets his apocalypse. He says that was God showing him not to call the Gentiles common or unclean. See, it used symbolic imagery, the very definition of an apocalypse. So Peter knew it wasn't really about eating animals. There was a meaning to it. He had an apocalypse, and so he had to figure out what the meaning of the apocalypse was. The Book of Jubilees is also an apocalypse, because there's a spiritual guide in the Book of Jubilees. So it's a pretty widespread genre. There's also an apocalypse of James. There's an apocalypse of Peter. There's an apocalypse of Paul. So there's a lot of this type of books. Now, yeah, some of them probably are pseudepigraphal. They're not actually written by the people that they claim to have written. But some of these might actually be legitimate, and we just don't know, because first of all, it uses symbolic imagery, and second of all, by and far, most Christians only study the 66 books in the Bible. So if there's an apocalypse of James that is legitimate, we never even read it. Because it's hard to understand, and somebody probably rejected it. If it is legitimate, somebody probably rejected it because they didn't understand what it was saying. And it's not that it's necessarily false. That's the point I'm trying to make with this right here. Like, going on. What is an apocalypse? If you don't understand what an apocalypse is, you're not going to understand the book of Revelation. Because you're going to be thinking it's a prophecy or something else, but you have to understand what you're looking at. Apocalyptic revelations are typically mediated through such means as dreams and visions, angels, heavenly journeys. These serve to connect two sets of axes. The spatial axis, in which God and the heavenly realm above and the human world below, and the temporal axis of the present and future. The revelation thus demonstrates that God rules the visible world, and that the present days are leading to an end time in which divine justice will be done, and God's rule will become visible. Mythic images with their roots in text from the Hebrew Bible and rich in symbolic meaning are a significant characteristic of the genre. Further characteristics include transcendentalism, mythology, pessimistic, cosmological, and historical surveys, dualism, numerology, and claims of ecstasy and inspiration, and esotericism. So, one thing that's mentioned in here is about the future redemptive time. So, like the Apocalypse of John, the book of Revelation, it goes into a lot of detail. 20 chapters about things that are occurring in John's day. And then the last 3 chapters are a very I would say a brief summary of things in the end times. And that's usually the way apocalypses are. You'll have the very detailed information about the current day in the prophet's world, or at least the soon to be coming days. So John talked a whole lot about the war between the Jews and Rome from 66 CE to 70 CE, but there's only a couple of chapters about what happens in the future, and that's the way that these apocalypses usually are. The reason that they are like that is he is connecting the current events, the events that are current to him, the Jewish war, he's connecting that to the end times and saying this stuff going on now sets the stage for the very end times, the great white throne judgment, the new heaven and new earth coming down, and all this. But it's not necessarily to give you a super detailed, accurate understanding of the things that are going to happen in the far future, which to us would be what we're interested in. We want to know about the end times. So the far-flung future, which is approaching us today, 2,000 years after the book of Revelation was mentioned, that's what we really want to know about, right? But there's not a whole lot of detail about that in the book of Revelation. There's only like 2.5 chapters at the end of the book. And again, it's very consolidated. It's not like he's giving you a whole lot of detail. The detail is in the prophetic writings, the stuff that I went over about the greater Exodus, because the greater Exodus and Gog and Magog and all that stuff is what's coming in the future. Okay, hopefully that helps you understand some of this. But it's always like that. Like the happy ending at the end is always very brief and very short. But whether you're talking about Daniel or whether you're talking about John, the events that Daniel describes in details is connected to the things at the very end. It sets the world up for those very ending events. And so now we've understood what an apocalypse is. Now we need to understand this prophetic terminology, or like this heading here, the apocalyptic terminology. If you don't understand the terminology, you're not going to understand what's being said. Now, Sir Isaac Newton does a terrific job of breaking this down. He's already done the research. He's already went through all the prophecies in Scripture, and he's looked at all the symbolic language and all these prophecies, and he has come up with the meaning of what all these terms mean. He's already done the legwork for you. Like, he's already made up a glossary that you can use to understand the apocalyptic terminology. So this is from his book, Observations upon the Prophecies of Daniel and the Apocalypse of St. John. And in chapter 2, he talks about prophetic language. And you can find this for free online. It is very easy to find. Just type in what you see at the bottom of your screen there, and you will find this. So you can read it for yourself, and you can see that I'm not making this up. I'm not just making up stuff to fit. Like Sir Isaac Newton lived hundreds of years ago. I'm using his work. I'm not coming up with anything on my own. So it's like, you just use it's essentially like a glossary made by Sir Isaac Newton. You just use that, apply it to the book of Revelation, and suddenly you can understand what John is saying in the book of Revelation. That's really all I do in all those videos I made on the Revelation being fulfilled. It's not rocket science. It's certainly not anything I came up with, because I'm not smart enough to do all the legwork. Sir Isaac Newton is smart. He did the legwork. All I'm doing is taking advantage of it to be able to share the information with you. So, for understanding the prophecies, we are, in the first place, to acquaint ourselves with the figurative language of the prophets. And by the way, this is Sir Isaac Newton writing this. This language is taken from the analogy between the world natural and an empire kingdom considered as a world politic. Accordingly, the whole world natural, consisting of heaven and earth, signifies the whole world politic, consisting of thrones and people. So much of it, as is considered in the prophecy, and the things that in the world signify the analogous things in this. And so here's where he gives you like the glossary. For the heavens and the things therein signify thrones and dignitaries, and those who enjoy them. The earth, with the things thereon, the inferior people. The lowest parts of the earth, called Hades or hell, the lowest or most miserable parts of them. So what he's saying is, when you see heaven and earth, those signify thrones and dignitaries. Heavens being those, the kings, the rulers, the earth, the inferior people, the common people, and then the lowest parts of the earth are the very lowest common people. And so, in the book that I read, The Mysteries History, Mr. Driscoll actually takes the information from Sir Isaac Newton, and he puts it into this handy-dandy little chart, and it's in the opening pages of his book, where you can refer to the chart. And when the book of Revelation mentions heavens and earth, that means the whole world politic, consisting of thrones and people. When it mentions just the heavens, that's the thrones and dignitaries. Just the earth is the inferior people, and so on. And I've got all this in the introduction video to my series on the Revelation being fulfilled, and you can refer to that if you want to. So the information's there. And it's not something that I'm making up. I'm using someone else's research from hundreds of years ago. So that brings us now to the events at the end of Revelation. This is a slide from the previous video. And I said that we are right about where Satan is being released and goes out to deceive the world, and it's setting up the Gog-Magog war. So that's the fourth line down here. Now, the reason that might be controversial is because you see that is after Jesus comes on the clouds of heaven, which is the second coming. And so there's a lot of people, well, not a lot. There was like 5 or 6 people who apparently didn't like the video because they gave it a thumbs down. And I have a feeling the reason they gave it a thumbs down, I don't know, because I don't think they commented, but I think it was because what I'm saying in the video goes against what they were taught in church. But what they don't understand is what they were taught in church labels Jesus a false prophet. So these people are upset with me, or they disliked my video. Maybe they're not really upset, but they disliked the video because they want Jesus to remain a false prophet. And the fact that I'm trying to show you he was not a false prophet is upsetting to them. That's the only reason I can think of someone would give it a thumbs down. Because I showed you the evidence. I showed you where in Matthew 24:30, Yeshua says he's coming on the clouds of heaven. And I showed you in Revelation 7, where John said that Yeshua is literally on his way. He's coming quickly. The time is near. These things are going to happen soon. And he's coming on the clouds. And then I showed you what coming on the clouds means. The clouds in general, if clouds are coming upon land, that is war coming. And specifically the type of war that will destroy a city or destroy a nation. If Yahweh is coming on the clouds, that means he is directly bringing this war upon these people for punishment. So, coming on the clouds of heaven is Yeshua. It was him bringing the armies of Rome to destroy the city. That's what that means in the prophetic, symbolic language. And I showed you several scriptures where that same descriptive phrase is used in Old Testament prophecy. Then I showed you where Josephus records seeing the sign of the Son of Man. And we know it's the sign of the Son of Man because before Yeshua's first coming, there was a star that was followed by the Magi. And we know it was his sign of his second coming because Josephus records it, says it looked like a sword. I said, it kind of also looks like a cross. And that's the sign of the Son of Man that's in heaven. And then Yeshua comes in the clouds of heaven. And I showed you where Josephus actually records them seeing the armies of heaven battling it out in the clouds. And Tacitus also records how they saw it, the battle raging in the clouds. So you have two testimonies where every eye in Judea saw the armies of heaven, and I'm presuming the armies of Satan, battling it out in the clouds. This is probably where Satan was thrown from heaven, thrown to the earth, and he's bound for 1,000 years. So I showed you the evidence. This is evidence that Jesus was telling the truth. This is evidence that Jesus is a true prophet. And this upsets people. They don't want him to be a true prophet. And again, man, it's like that video I made. Christians hate Jesus' words. They hate them. Because, see, this goes against church doctrine. In fact, 2 Timothy 2:16, Paul is recording. Now, it's more or less believed that Paul did not write 2 Timothy, but it says in 2 Timothy 2:16, avoid irreverent babble, for it will lead people to more and more ungodliness, and their talk will spread like gangrene. Among them are Hymenaeus and Philetus, who have swerved from the truth, saying that the resurrection has already happened. They are upsetting the faith of some. So that tells you, because right after Yeshua comes in the clouds and Satan is bound, then there's this resurrection where the saints go up to heaven and they rule and reign with Christ from heaven, not Christ on earth, but from heaven, for 1,000 years. And so these two guys, Hymenaeus and Philetus, or whatever, I don't know how to pronounce the guy's name, but it's in verse 17, 2 Timothy 2:17. They're telling people the truth. They're saying, look, the resurrection's already occurred. Jesus has already returned. So whether Paul wrote Timothy 2:16 through 18 or someone else did, obviously, like, it's evidence that people were saying that in the early church. That there were at least some people who were saying, hey, Yeshua's already returned. And this confirms Jesus as a true prophet. This does not make him a liar. It makes church people liars. But apparently the 5 or 6 people that thumbs down my video had rather Jesus be a liar than, these early supposed, these, they call them church fathers, which also, of course, breaks Jesus' command to call no man father, but they rather Jesus be a liar than these people. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of. All right, so the 1,000-year reign in heaven, it was reflected on earth when we had the European Christian kings ruling with Christ. So they were ruling with Christ on the earth, but Christ was physically present in heaven with the elders. So Satan was released. I think he was released in the 17 or 1800s. I don't take the 1,000-year binding as being literally 1,000 years and he's released on year 1001. I just think it means a very long time, the same as, God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. That doesn't mean it's supposed to be specifically exactly 1,000. It's just a very big number, very long time, because, and I'm running out of breath saying this, the apocalypse is always symbolic language. The 1,000 years is symbolic language for a very long time. So if it really ended up being 1,700 years, 1,700 years, that's fine. It doesn't contradict the apocalypse, because the apocalypse is symbolic. But new heaven, new earth, Jerusalem, they come down from heaven. And right after it mentions the new heavens, the new earth, and new Jerusalem coming down, it says Yeshua is sitting on the throne. And a little while later it says that he is in New Jerusalem. The Lamb is present in New Jerusalem. So, I read that, it means one of two things. First of all, the fact that he's coming down, if he's on the throne in New Jerusalem when it's coming down, then that means that right now he's in heaven still. So he came to earth in vengeance and in glory, destroyed Jerusalem with the Roman army, and then he went back to heaven. And that's where he is now. That's because we know that because he was in the throne room in Revelation 20, 4 through 6. Because John was in the throne room, and he saw the elders in there ruling with Christ for 1,000 years. So he's back in heaven, and then he comes down with New Jerusalem, from what I can tell. The throne that he's sitting on, it could still be in heaven. Maybe New Jerusalem comes down and he remains in heaven. I don't know. I mean, it does say the Lamb is in New Jerusalem, so I'm assuming the throne that he was seen sitting on was in New Jerusalem as it came down. But either way, the point of me saying this is, he's on the throne, and he's not here. But if somebody did say that they saw him, at this point, it doesn't necessarily mean they're a false prophet. There was one time in history that Jesus said, if anyone says that they see me, it's a lie. And that was when Paul supposedly saw him, in between his first coming and his second coming. Now, most Christians don't want to hear this. Like I said, they had rather Jesus be a false prophet. And that brings us to this comment that was made in my last video. And now, I think that this person, so I covered up their name because I don't really know if they would want this shared in a video. I don't really think that they would mind, but just in case, I cover up their name. The person's name references the story of Gilgamesh, and I think that this is probably someone who's not a believer. And to be honest with you, I don't even know if he watched the video. I think he probably did not. Because if he watched the video, he would understand that his comment doesn't apply to what I said. I think probably, I don't know, but this is what I think is that this guy probably goes around to different videos where people make a video on the second coming of Christ and just post this comment. Because if he is not a believer, and I don't know if maybe he is a believer, I don't know. I'm making assumptions here based upon what he says in the comment. But I think it's probably just copied and pasted into various videos as a comment. But I actually wrote him back. I said, thank you for posting this. Because this actually makes a point that I want to make in this video I'm making now. That in order to not call Jesus a false prophet, you have to believe in preterism. You have to believe that the book of Revelation has already been fulfilled, at least through chapter 20. At least through the part where Satan is unbound. You have to believe it. Because if you think the book of Revelation is still in the future, then you've just made Jesus into a false prophet. So, let's read his comment. And he's absolutely correct in everything he says. I don't disagree with his comment. I just disagree with his in understanding of what it means. Many passages attributed to Jesus have him predicting the end of his generation. The time is fulfilled, the kingdom of heaven is at hand, repent and believe on the good news, etc. Mark 1:15. This generation shall not pass away until all these things take place. Truly I say to you, you will not finish going through the cities of Israel till the Son of Man comes. Truly I say to you, there are some of those who are standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of heaven after it has come with power. From now on, you shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds. I don't disagree with anything there. Jesus said all of those things with the understanding that the people present would still be alive when he returned. Jesus, now this is where I do disagree, because he thinks that Jesus still hadn't returned, because he doesn't have the knowledge that was in the video that he posted this on, which this is why I think he didn't actually watch the video. It says, Jesus as a false apocalyptic prophet is a general consensus of critical scholarship. Even critical Christian scholars like Dale Allison, the Son of Man, Jesus himself, was supposed to be at the end of the world, an end of the world arbiter, as Bart Ehrman points out in his lecture referenced below, and as the Bible states, he is supposed to come within the lifetime of Jesus' followers. It did not happen. Yes, it did. If this person had watched the video, he would have seen that. It did happen. And part of the misunderstanding is because, yes, Jesus is the arbiter at the end of the world. But he wasn't saying that this was the end of the world. He wasn't saying the end of the world was when he returned. He was saying that the end of the nation of Judea was. And you have to understand the symbolic language of what's being said in the apocalypse. And you have to read the rest of the apocalypse. And make a list of the events you see happening at the end and the order in which they occur. And you'll see that him coming on the clouds was not the very end. He did exactly what he said he was going to do. But we don't understand it because we don't have the apocalyptic terminology down to understand what John is really communicating to us. So then he, asks you to read this article, but we'll skip that. It says, and this is his words: Jesus falsely prophesied his return in the first century. Truly I say to you, you will not finish going through the cities of Israel till the Son of Man comes. In Matthew 10. For the Son of Man shall come in the glory of his Father and angels. Then he shall reward every man according to his works. Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death. And it goes on. It's kind of repeating what he said before. And he's correct. He is correct. But except he doesn't understand that Jesus did in fact return. Down here at the bottom where it says, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. Okay, see, the author of this comment thinks that this is literal. So if the sun is dark and the moon will not give its light, that sounds like the end of the world. But that's not what it means. The sun is the ruling power, which is Rome. The moon will not give its light. Those are the lesser rulers in the kingdom, probably the Edomites. The stars will fall from the sky. That's the noblemen are going to lose their positions of power, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. That's about the authorities of these different ruling classes. He's talking about the destruction of the ruling hierarchy that rules over Judea. All this is dealt with in my series on Revelation Fulfilled. This is not about the literal sun in the sky. It's about the king who, at this point, was probably represented by Caesar. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. That's the star that Josephus mentioned seeing. And then all the people will mourn as they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. This is also recorded by Josephus and Tacitus. We just looked at it. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call. They will gather his elect from the four winds of the earth, from one end of heaven to another. This, I think, is referring to the flight to Pella. He removed all of his people out of the destruction and gave them safe passage into Pella, where they had refuge. And then Jerusalem was destroyed along with all of his enemies. It goes on, this generation will not pass away. We've already read that. Signs, sun, moon, and stars on the earth. Nations will be in anguish and perplexity. Again, this is all prophetic language. People fainting from terror. You've got to read The War of the Jews by Josephus, how miserable, how awful it was. People were eating their own children. They got so hungry. Reading the pages of Josephus's description of the destruction of Jerusalem is horrifying. I can't imagine living through that. It was like a literal hell on earth. The heavenly bodies will be shaken. Yes, the powers that rule over the area, they were shaken, turned upside down. And again, that paragraph's pretty much repetitive. Truly, I tell you, this generation will not pass away. Again, it's kind of repeating the same thing over and again. Jesus promised to return over 2,000 years ago, and he still hasn't. Wrong. Yes, he had. Like all of this. See, this in itself is why this matters. Because people write, these academics, they will write scholarly articles where they look at what Jesus prophesied. And they're correct. They're correct. That's exactly what Yeshua was saying. He was saying he was going to return back then. The place that they're wrong is that they either don't know or they don't tell you that he did return. We have the evidence. It's just he didn't return in the way that the church has taught us. Oh, it's the end of the world. No, he wasn't saying it was going to be the end of the world. John wasn't saying it's going to be the end of the world. Because you see the millennial kingdom after Jesus returns. So it couldn't be the end of the world if there's going to be a 1,000-year reign afterwards. It couldn't be then. How are we supposed to understand that the Gog-Magog war took place after the millennial reign if Jesus was on earth during the millennial reign? So Jesus, in the middle of the millennial reign, Satan is going around deceiving the nations and he's not doing anything about it? It doesn't make sense the way that the church understands it. It does make sense when you understand that most of the book of Revelation is fulfilled. Like, I'm trying to tell you the truth. And people are getting upset with me. In fact, when I came to this understanding, it's probably been 5 or 6 years, 7 years ago. I was, not longer than that. I bet it's been 10 years. But I was at Sukkot one year with my ex-wife and our family. And there was a family there that we went to synagogue with. And we were talking about the end times. And I told them all this. I was like, well, that Jesus I think he returned during the Jewish war. Like, I wasn't quite as confident about it then. So I was just like, well, I think this is what happened. And I told them why. And then, we got back to our tent. And she was my wife at the time, she's my ex-wife now, but she was like, tell me how embarrassed she was, and she couldn't believe that I said that to them, that Jesus had already returned, and how stupid I looked, and blah, 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 and, she was so humiliated, and it's like, really? I told them the truth. I showed them the evidence. See, I was the one person in that conversation that was making Jesus into a true prophet. everyone else standing around there having that conversation, saying that he still hadn't returned after 2,000 years, they were labeling him a false prophet. They didn't understand that. They didn't know that. But that's the truth. That's why this matters. You know, the author of this comment, he mentions Bart Ehrman several times. I like Bart Ehrman. I like his books. I've got his book, Misquoting Jesus. Great book. I've recommended it to people in videos that I've done. But at the beginning of that book, Misquoting Jesus, Bart Ehrman gives some biographical information about himself. And he tells you that he used to be a Christian. In fact, he went into theological studies because he was a Christian. And then when he got into the university system and he was being taught all this stuff, he came to the realization, well, I guess Jesus was a false prophet. You know, Mr. Ehrman, I think, and now it's been a while since I read his biography, but I think he talked about even being in a Pentecostal church when he was a kid and seeing people healed and witnessing miracles and experiencing the Holy Spirit. And then he goes to get his education in theology to better understand the Bible, and it ends up turning him into an atheist. He's an atheist now. And he's an atheist now because of the church. Because they've been teaching people wrong. And then you have somebody like me who comes along and says, hey man, I want to tell you the truth. I want to tell you that Jesus is in fact a true prophet. And I'm the heretic? I'm the heretic? I'm the one that's in error because I'm teaching you that Jesus was true? I'm the one that, is embarrassing whenever I tell people the truth about this? The church should be ashamed of themselves. They should be ashamed of themselves saying this stuff that they say. Saying, oh yeah, Jesus said he was coming then, but that wasn't true. He was lying to you. Jesus knew he wasn't coming back for another 2,000 years. He was lying. He didn't lie. He told you the truth. The church is lying. And you know what? It cost Bart Ehrman his faith. And I feel sorry for Mr. Ehrman. He was misled. It cost him his faith. Maybe even cost him his salvation. But the thing is, Bart Ehrman knows more about the Bible than probably 90% of the people listening to this video. Probably knows more than I do. I'm sure he knows more than I do. I mean, he's a very well-educated man. It's sad. It is sad. So, I guess one more thing I want to touch on is, it's in 1 Peter, verse 15 is one I really want to focus on here. 1 Peter 3:15, where he says to always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you the reason for the hope that is in you. And we have been conditioned as believers to shy away from making a defense. And I don't know, maybe it's because the church is intimidated by people like Mr. Ehrman or Robert Eisenman or some of these guys, these scholarly academic people who have studied the scriptures and studied ancient documents for years, devoted their life to it. And you hear people, and I've heard it, I've probably even said it when I was a new Christian, like, man, you don't want to read those books because those are just these atheist theologians or scholars that they want to go and prove the Bible wrong and rip the Bible apart and all this stuff. And in reality, you know what they know? More than we do. They do. And yeah, they do come at it from the perspective of, a lot of them are atheists. But that doesn't mean that, but they're right about stuff. The thing they're wrong about is being an atheist. The thing they're wrong about is because they're looking at the church for being able to explain the fulfillments of these kind of prophecies, and they can't do it. And so these people, these scholars, they're just like, well, I guess, these are false prophecies because the church can't explain how they've come true. The church specifically says they haven't come true. The church says that Jesus still hasn't returned. And so that's what turns people into atheists. We shouldn't have to shy away from the truth. If somebody writes a book and publishes a book that says, hey, do you realize that Jesus said that he was going to return in the first century? Then we shouldn't be like, oh, you're an atheist, you're a liar. Maybe we should look at their evidence and just say, hey, is there any evidence that Jesus did return in the first century? Oh, crap, look, here's the sign of the Son of Man. Oh, look, here's eyewitness testimony, seeing the war raging in heaven. Oh, look, here's a Bible, 600-year-old Bible that actually tells you the book of Revelation was fulfilled in the first century. Gives you the timeline of events and everything. See, the church knew 500 or 600 years ago that Revelation had been fulfilled, at least up through chapter 20, verse 7. They knew that. It's just we've forgotten it. They knew the millennial kingdom had already occurred. They thought, the Bible I was reading that I mentioned before, I had this PDF. I mentioned it in the previous video. I had this PDF of a Bible from like the 1500s, and in the back of it, there was a timeline for the book of Revelation. And it had the whole thing mapped out. It even told you when the millennial reign was. They had the millennial reign ending in 1066 AD because that was when the Normans invaded England. And in England, they thought, well, if the Normans are invading, this must be the war of Gog and Magog. So they understood that the millennial kingdom ran from 66 AD until 1066 AD. But instead, now we got this new theology about the Revelation's all future dated stuff. And somebody like me goes and tries to share the truth with you and say, hey, look, Jesus returned in or around 70 AD. And it makes people upset. Not all of you. I know some of you like the video. I thank you for your positive comments. I'm not talking about you, obviously. And I don't even hold it against the guy. Like the guy who posted the comment, I'm glad he did it. It's a good visual tool that you guys can, the rest of you can look at and understand. Hey, maybe this guy here, David Hodnosri, maybe he's right. Maybe Jesus is a true prophet. Maybe the church was wrong. But, those 5 people that were apparently upset gave me a thumbs down because I thought Jesus was a true prophet. Well, you can give me 1,000 thumbs down. I don't care. I mean, it doesn't change the fact that it's true. So, thank you for listening. Please share this video with your friends and subscribe if you haven't already. And, if you got a comment about anything I said in the last 3 videos or so, put them on this video or the other 2. I'd like to hear your comments. But, if we're going to study this issue out and we're going to start from the incorrect premise that it's all in the future, then we're never going to be able to get to the truth. So let's start with the correct premise, which is that he did actually return in glory at the destruction of Jerusalem. And then, once we get that right, then we can look at the rest of the events in the book of Revelation, and now maybe we can figure out how that plays out, instead of being stuck in an incorrect theology that makes Jesus a false prophet. So, I hope that this has given you some things to think about. I hope it's been a blessing and that you appreciate me sharing this with you. You have a good rest of your day, and shalom.